Yeah, so one of the major threads in the Dairy Up program is to unleash the potential of the cow. We recognise that in Australia, the average production is so far below the genetic potential of the cow that what we want to do is make sure that we gather more of the genetic potential. We've had a major question though arise in the last few years, and a number of studies that have done in both the US and in Australia, we've noticed that we're losing a lot of cows very early from the herds. And so what we wanted to do was try and understand why this is. We wanted to unlock the potential of the cow through understanding the geriatric or the older cow. And in doing so, we pulled in a number of collaborators. Dr. Golder, of course, is the research director at Cybus. Jose Santos, who we've had a long relationship with, the University of Florida. Similarly, a couple of colleagues at Guelph, Stephen LeBlanc, Todd Duffield, and we've been able to involve our new PhD student on the Dairy Up project, David Sheedy. So we've put a team together to have a look, and fortunately we've got about 3 papers ready to go off for submission to journals right now. And obviously I'm not going to be able to cover too much of this story in the time available, but what I'd like to do is just start the story. Well, why bother worrying about the fact that we're losing cows? I mean, cull cow prices are good. We're making money on those culls, but there's important observations that we can make. If we look at the sort of current structure that's of the herd that we're looking at now with the data that we've gathered, what we can see is that you've got about nearly 35% heifers, some herds up to 45, and of course others lower at around 25, but you can see a steady decline from lactation 2 and 3. And finally, these older cows at 4 and 5 plus, they're looking at less than 10% of the herd are making it through to a 5 plus structure. Now, if we look across at the, a potential structure, what we can see is that if we just move that structure slightly to reduce the number of heifers entering the herd to 25% and retaining a few of the older cows, what we get is by changing that age structure, we can produce about 16% more milk. We'd have 8% more crossbred calves or purebred heifers to sell. We can apply a lot more selection pressure to bring in better genetic potential animals. And we can importantly decrease greenhouse gas intensity and total production. So the question is, what's been stopping us from doing that? Why are we not winning, with what seems to be a reasonably obvious strategy? And what are the downsides if we do potentially change the age structure of our herd? So what we did was we got together with our colleagues and friends from Australia, USA, Canada, and we looked at pulling together all the data that these guys have gathered over time. So between us all, we've got around 36,000 cows worth of data that's been rigorously collected for different studies. And what we wanted to do was look at health, reproduction and metabolism of these cows to help direct our future studies in Dairy Up. So we want to look at this intensively as part of the Dairy Up project. So this is a backward look in time to see what can we learn, how can we focus future studies. So our goal was to look at why we're losing so many cows, and our key understandings are that we want to address issues of profit, cow care, social license. We want to de-risk the dairy industry, and we want to have happy cows. And one of our key goals in Dairy Up is to have happy cows. So I'm going to share a little of what we've found. One of the major reasons cows leave the herd, about 33% of culls, are really culled because of reproductive failure. So what we wanted to do was have a look at parity differences in terms of reproductive failure. And what you've got here is effectively a cumulative histogram, or for those who are more excited about the statistical approaches, it's a survival curve. So in other words, what this graph shows is the cumulative proportion of cows that get pregnant over time. So you can see that roughly by 100 days, we're getting about 65% of the cows in this population pregnant. And what you can see is that there are distinct differences between parity groups. The heifers go in calf better than the second and third calvers, go in calf better than the fourth calvers, go in calf much better than the fifth calvers. And if you look at the difference in say, percentage of cows pregnant by 100 days, you can see there's about a 10% difference between the cows that are in the first parity versus those in the fifth. And so there's a dramatic difference in who's getting in calf and how rapidly they're getting in calf. One of the questions we wanted to look at is, again, to kind of have a look at how milk production might be involved in this, because a lot of people are very worried that high producing cows are at greater risk of getting in calf. And indeed, if we look at time to pregnancy and we look at the probability of getting pregnant, what we can see is that, in fact, the cows that are lower producers within a group, so what we did was we basically centered data, we centered their milk production by their herd group, so that, for example, the average cow in a group is 0 on this. A cow that's a poorer producer would be, say, minus 20 litres, and a cow that's a really good producer is going to be plus 20 litres. So what you can see is that, in fact, as we have poor producing cows that are more around that 20 litres below herd average, and ones that are about 20 litres above herd average at peak milk yield, well, they're going to be at lower risk of getting pregnant. Well, if anything can produce above 20 litres above the herd average, it's a pretty spectacular cow. And certainly it's going to be hard to design diets to feed a whole herd and look after those cows. But you can see that there's as much problem with low producing cows as there is with high producing cows getting pregnant. And what you can see in this, again, is this very strong pattern of heifers being much more likely to get pregnant than the parity 2s, parity 3s, parity 4s, and parity 5 cows. Why is this so? Well, we wanted to have a bit of a look and a scratch down at the data. So what we looked at was the probability of getting pregnant at first service. And this is not nearly as dramatic an effect. And so what we can find is that the odds of pregnancy at first insemination declined ever so slightly with milk production. So there is a slight drop-off with increased milk production. Parity 2 cows had a much more dramatic effect than other parity cows, but what we found was that there was a lot less difference in the probability of pregnancy at first service than the overall time to pregnancy. So that when we've got a cohort of cows together and those older cows get bred, at that first insem, they're not that different to everybody else. They're a little bit lower, but they're not that different. In fact, parity 4 cows, in this case, had the lowest odds. Okay, but the problem really is overall risk of pregnancy. And so it's cows getting pregnant in a lactation that is really the big issue. It's not really about first service. It's much more about cows not getting pregnant at all. So it appears that as these cows get older, they've got a serious problem about getting pregnant at all. And this is what we're looking at in this figure, is again, we're looking at the milk yield at approximately 70 days in milk, and it's centered on group and predicted probability of pregnancy in a lactation. And what you can see is all parities differed, with parity 1s having the greatest odds of being pregnant, and parity 5, the least odds of being pregnant in a lactation. And again, what you see is a very marked drop-off with lower producing cows and a slight drop-off with the higher producing cows in terms of probability at pregnancy. So despite a similar pregnancy at first service for the older cows, increased parity saw them removed in that lactation. So there's something seriously wrong with these cows in terms of their risk. So reproductive failure is the major source of loss of cows. About 30% of loss of cows is down to reproductive failure. So in general, as they age, they have worse performance. However, they have a very similar performance at first insemination. It is the failure to be mated and ultimately not going in calf that really defines the problems of these older cows. And both high production and very low production are risk factors for time to pregnancy and getting pregnant in a lactation. And production has only a small effect on pregnancy at first insemination. And we've got methods to improve reproduction. which is the good news. I guess one of the questions we've got is, well, it's all very well if we have more older cows come through, but are they going to be useful to us? Are there problems associated with these older cows? And what we were able to do is drill down into our data and find that we had an extremely high incidence of milk fever in these older cows. So clinical hypocalcemia, for those who want to be fussy, but milk fever. We found that about 12.5% of the older cows in parity greater than 5 were struggling with milk fever. Now, we've got other data and for another day around why this might be, but what we have is those cows were at over 20 times the risk of even parity 2 cows for getting milk fever, and they were hundreds of times the risk of heifers to get milk fever. Heifers did tend to suffer more dystocia. As cows aged, they had more retained placenta. Younger cows had more metritis and endometritis. Displaced abomasum didn't differ too much among parities, but ketosis did. As older cows, they tended to get more ketosis, more lameness, and more mastitis. So if we age our herd, as we suggest, to get that extra production, you know, to save the greenhouse gas, to have our happy cows living long, we do run the risk of dealing with more disease. So we actually have to understand and solve these metabolic diseases at the same time as we work out how to retain these cows in the herd. And of course, some of these diseases are going to lead to the culling and loss of cows. One of the extraordinary findings we got out of this study was that we had around 700 cows with body weight and body condition score data across our data set. And what I want to do is just walk you steadily through this. And these are Holstein cows. So most of our work was done with Holstein cows, but we also had about 150 cows of other breeds. And what I can show you is that if you take parity 1 cows, you can see that most of them have a low body condition score or low body weight, or a high body condition score with low body weight. Well, that makes sense. Young cows weigh less and they've got a higher body condition score. But what you can see is that when you start going on parity 5 cows, you can see that they've got, some of them, a low body condition score and low body weight, but in fact, most of them fall into a high body condition, a low body condition score and high body weight. So what it appears is that as cows age, they gain weight, of course, we all know that, but what we didn't perhaps know was that they lost body condition score. And this may be a major factor determining whether they go in calf, how healthy they are, and where they sit on the scale of risk for disorders. Well, where are we going to now? Well, we want to define and improve what we've done. This is only a few of the results. There's much more, with strong evidence that these older cows have an impaired metabolism, and we want to understand why. In order to fix it, we've got to define it. So we're going to be working on looking at these older cows, but we've already got a lot of solutions for herds available. For example, ration balancing, better protein nutrition. Fat nutrition is really important for reproduction. We've got some reproductive treatments that work. Where will we look? We'll look at protein metabolism, rumen function. We're going to look at calcium and bone, cholesterol and fats. And we're going to want to know, why do older cows lose that body condition score? And what does that mean in terms of reproduction and health? And lastly, we're going to do a lot of work on facility design to see if we can improve facilities with intensification to make cows happier and longer lived. I want to thank my collaborators. I want to thank the past students who contributed data sets. Certainly, I want to thank my colleagues in Dairy Up. It's an exciting collaboration, and people are working well together. And I want to thank the corporate and public good supporters for the research included in these original studies. So thank you.